Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again with my 5th video in this One Beautiful Scene series, wherein I go through my favorite moments from Steven Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and I use this opportunity to look a little more closely at what makes all of these scenes so compelling and so memorable, at least to me. So today we're looking at a scene from near the middle of Book 5, Midnight Tides. Even though the scene isn't too far, it's this first annotated section here, it's not too far into the novel. My analysis of this moment and just reading through the scene is going to spoil something really big and significant from the book, so I would not recommend watching this video unless you don't care about big spoilers like at all, or unless maybe, of course, if you've already read the book, or at least through the halfway point of this one. Now see, Midnight Tides is one of my favorites in the series, and the shock and dramatic effect of this moment is a really big part of that. So to spare anyone from being spoiled here, here's your final warning, and please turn away now if you don't want this spoiled, and then come back once you've read through the book. Thank you. Alright, so setting the scene, the Taist Edur are basically, they're a more tribal hunter lifestyle culture living in the northwest of this Lether continent. A new setting introduced in Book 5 here. In their society and most of these characters in the book, they haven't been introduced or covered so far in any of the previous 4 novels of the series. The 4 Sengar brothers are Fear, Binidas, Troll, and Hrulad, and these 4 were sent by the Edur warlock leader figure, this warlock king named Hanan Mosag, and they're sent into the cold northern wasteland type of area to retrieve a magical sword of unknown power. All we really know is that Hanan Mosag wants this to help him attain even more power through his alliance with some mysterious god character. And the Warlock King really wants this power to perhaps eventually take on the more, traditionally civilized Lethery kingdom to the south. Sadly, in their quest to retrieve the sword, one of the 4 brothers, the youngest, named Hrulad Sengar, he grabs hold of the mystical weapon, but then he is killed. And so the brothers, they have to make it back to their village, and they get back there with the sword, but also the sword is being held by their dead brother, Hrulad. And so the Sengar family's slave, a man named Udinaas, from that aforementioned Lethery culture, this Udinaas slave character, easily one of my favorites in the series, side note, but he is charged with the painstaking task of preparing the corpse in the traditional way the Edur people go about their burial rites and practices. So now I'll start reading this scene of how Udinaas is going through this process. Hrulad Sengar's body was frozen, a pallid gray, stiff-limbed figure lying on the stone platform, head thrown back, eyes squeezed shut, mouth stretched long as if striving for a breath never found. The warrior's hands were closed about the grip of a strange mottled, straight-bladed sword, frost-rimed and black-flecked with dried blood. Udinaas had filled the nose and ear holes with wax. He held the pincers, waiting for the first gold coin to reach optimum heat on the iron plate suspended above the coals. He had placed one on the sheet, then, 20 heartbeats later, another. The order of placement for noble-born blooded warriors was precise, as was the allotted time for the entire ritual. Awaiting Udinaas was a period of mind-numbing repetition and exhaustion. But a slave could be bent to any task. There were hard truths found only in the denigration of one's own spirit if one was inclined to look for them. Should, for example, a man require self-justification prior to, say, murder or some other atrocity, take this body, a young man whose flesh is now a proclamation of death. The Edur use coins. Lethery use linen, lead, and stone. In both, the need to cover, to disguise, to hide away the horrible absence writ there in that motionless face. Open or closed, it began with the eyes. Udinaas gripped the edge of the Lethery coin with the pincers. These first 2 had to be slightly cooler than the others, lest the eyes behind the lids burst. He had witnessed that once when he was apprenticed to an elder slave who had begun losing his sense of time. Sizzling, Then an explosive spurt of lifeless fluid, foul-smelling and murky with decay, the coin settling far too deep in the socket, the hissing of aberration and crinkling, blackening skin. He swung round on the stool, careful not to drop the coin, then leaned over Rulad Sangar's face, lowered the hot gold disc. A soft sizzle as the skin of the lid melted, all moisture drawn from it so that it tightened round the coin, holding it fast. Alright, so we'll take a quick break there. Notice just the beautiful yet horrifying attention to detail here. While Rulad, the character so far, he's shown to be kind of this vain youngest brother. He's annoying, he's ignorant, he's an immature character. And that's what we get before they go on their adventure. But then still, here in death, both Erikson and the slave Udinaas are taking great care to respect these customs and this painstaking process of putting the body to rest, of covering him up, of, I guess, kind of like making something more meaningful out of this death than just a young man too eager for glory, falling short, dying, and then nothing. They want to do something more about this, something respectful with this, both Erikson and Udinaas is kind of commenting on that. So when the Sengars have a slave to force to perform this respectful administrations, and when Erikson kind of has a character to do this through, when someone else has to do the painstaking dirty work of turning tragedy into something honorable and respectful, I think we get a scene like this, a beautiful scene like this, at least how it starts out. Rulad Sengar being covered in wax and coins by Udinaas. Keep all of this in mind as we move forward with the scene, especially what the symbolism might be with a body just being covered in coins. Especially also that those coins are from a different culture, a quote-unquote more civilized culture, the Lethery, famous for their greed and their wealth. Anyway, back to the reading. He repeated the task with the second coin. The heat in the chamber was thawing the corpse, and as Udinaas worked setting coins on the torso, he was continually startled by movement. Arched back settling, an elbow voicing a soft thud, rivulets of meltwater crawling across the stone, to drip from the sides as if the body now wept. The stench of burnt skin was thick in the hot, humid air. Rulad Sengar's corpse was undergoing a transformation, acquiring gleaming armor, becoming something other than Taist Idor. In the mind of Udinaas, he ceased to exist as a thing once living, the work before the slave little different from mending nets. Chest to abdomen, each spear wound packed with clay and oil, encircled with coins then sealed. Pelvis, thighs, knees, shins, ankles, the tops of the feet, shoulders, upper arms, elbows, forearms. 163 coins. Udinaas wiped sweat from his eyes, then rose and walked, limbs aching, over to the cauldron containing the melted wax. He had no idea how much time had passed. The stench kept his appetite at bay, but he had filled the hollow in his stomach a half-dozen times with cool water. Outside, the rain had continued, battering on the roof, swirling over the ground beyond the walls. A village in mourning, none would disturb him until he emerged. He would have preferred a half-dozen Eater widows conducting the laying of coins, with him at his usual station, tending to the fire. The last time he had done this in solitude had been with Uruth's father, killed in battle by the Arape. He had been younger then, awed by the spectacle and his role in its making. Attaching the handle to the cauldron, Udinaas lifted it from the hearth and carefully carried it back to the corpse. A thick coating over the front and sides of the corpse, a short time for the wax to cool, not too much so that it cracked when he turned over the body. Then he would return to the gold coins. Udinaas paused for a moment, standing over the dead Taist Idor. Ah, Rulad, he sighed. You could surely strut before the women now, couldn't you? Okay. So here at the end of this kind of introduction to this scene, Udinaas is basically mocking how he supposes the rest of the village will feel about all this. Because of the slave's hard work, people will, now be able to look at a dead man and respect him, when on Rulad's own merits and character traits before death, no one really had much, if any, respect for him. And yeah, so now moving on from that, now there's a brief break in the scene where Erikson gives us a moment to kind of breathe a little bit. He takes us outside of this House of the Dead with Roulette and Udinaas, and Erikson's showing us just other characters in the village, mourning Roulette's death, having conversations about exactly what this might mean, conversations, in their own way, and they're all waiting for Udinaas to finish up the burial rites. When we finally go back into the burial rites scene, Erikson gives us this. Like a bed of gold in a mountain stream, a blurred gleam swimming before his eyes, Udinaas leaned back, only now fully feeling the leaden weight of his exhausted muscles, slung like chains from his bones. The stench of burnt flesh had painted his lungs, coating the inside of his chest, and seeping its insipid poison into his veins. His flesh felt mired in dross. He stared down at the gold-studded back of Roulette Sengar. The wax coating the form had cooled, growing more opaque with every passing moment. Wealth belongs to the dead, or so it must be for one such as me. Beyond my reach, he considered those notions the way they drifted through the fog in his mind. Indebtedness and poverty, the defining limits of most lives. Only a small proportion of the Lethri population knew riches, could indulge in excesses. Theirs was a distinct world, an invisible paradise framed by interests and concerns unknown to everyone else. I mentioned just keep thinking in mind, especially with Udinaas, they're reflecting on the wealth and kind of greed at the center of the upper class of Lethri society. Think about these things like the weight of someone's debt, the weight of gold. Pay attention to all of this. All right, moving forward. Udinaas frowned, curious at his own feelings. There was no envy, only sorrow, a sense of all that lay beyond his grasp and would ever remain so. In a strange way, the wealthy Lethri had become as remote and alien to him as the Edur. He was disconnected, the division as sharp and absolute as the one before him now. His own worn self and the gold-sheathed corpse before him, the living and the dead, the dark motion of his body and the perfect immobility of Roulette Sengar. He prepared for his final task before leaving the chamber. The wax had solidified sufficiently to permit the turning over of the body. Upon entering this house, Roulette's parents would expect to find their dead son lying on his back, made virtually unrecognizable by the coins and the wax, made, in fact, into a sarcophagus, already remote, with the journey to the shadow world begun. Errant, take me, have I the strength for this? Take another quick pause to just say, in this moment, Udinaas could be speaking of his physical strength, the strength to turn the body over, right? But let's just keep that in the back of our minds and wait to see what level of emotional strength Udinaas might need in a few moments, as well as the type of strength, fortitude of emotion that the Sengar, the other brothers, are going to need to get through everything that is about to go down here. Right. The corpse had been rolled onto wooden paddles with curved handles that were both attached to a single lever. A four-legged ridged pole was set acrossways beneath the lever, providing the fulcrum. Udinaas straightened and positioned himself at the lever, taking the blackwood in both hands and settling on it the weight of his upper body. He hesitated, lowering his head until his brow rested on his forearms. The shadow wraith was silent, not a single whisper in his ear for days now. The blood of the Wyvil slept. He was alone. He had been expecting an interruption through the entire procedure, Hanan Mosag and his Krishnan thundering into the chamber to cut off Roulette's fingers or the entire hands. Having no instructions to the contrary, Udinaas had sheathed the sword in wax, angled slightly as it reached down along the body's thighs. He drew a deep breath, then pushed down on the lever, lifting the body a fraction. Cracks in the wax, a crazed web of lines, but that was to be expected, easily repaired. Udinaas pushed harder, watching as the body began turning, edging onto its side. The sword's weight defeated the wax sheathing the blade, and the point clunked down on the stone platform, drawing the arms with it. Udinaas swore under his breath, blinking the sweat from his eyes. Plate-sized sheets of wax had fallen away. The coins, at least, he saw with relief, remained firmly affixed. He slipped a restraining strap over the lever to hold it in place, then moved to the corpse, repositioning the sword. He nudged the massive weight further over in increments until the balance shifted and the body thumped onto its back. I'll take just a quick moment. I was just kind of thinking, let's kind of think about how I wonder if the wax might have a sort of graying quality to it, and just the natural skin tone of the eater is gray. So you have this wax to represent eater culture going on to Ruled, and then you have the gold to kind of represent Lethri culture going on to him. It's not a fully formed thought, but just kind of an interesting thing to think about. Just wanted to take a quick moment to mention that. Going on. Udinaas waited until he regained his breath. Another coating of wax was needed to repair the damage. Then he could stumble out of this nightmare. A slave needn't think. There were tasks to be done. Too many thoughts were crawling through him, interfering with his concentration. He stumbled back to the hearth to retrieve the cauldron of wax. A strange snapping sound behind him. Udinaas turned. He studied the corpse, seeking the place where the wax had broken loose. There, along the jaw, splitting wide over the mouth, he recalled the facial contortion that had been revealed when the bindings had been removed. It was possible he would have to sew the lips together. He picked up the cauldron and made his way back to the corpse. He saw the head jerk back, a shuddering breath, and then the corpse screamed. Whew. So, I was not sure how I felt about resurrection in fantasy, but the power, like before I read that, I wasn't sure if it was like a trope or technique that I would enjoy, but the power and shock and kind of horror and implications of this quick moment of Ruled starting to scream. This convinced me that I at least love the way Erikson handles resurrection. Brilliant stuff, but just wait for what comes next. From nothingness, a scene slowly came into resolution, and Troll Sengar, where outside of the House of the Dead and the brother of Ruled, one of his brother's point of views, Troll Sengar found himself standing, once more amidst gusting wind and swirling snow. He was surrounded, a ring of dark, vague shapes. The smeared gleam of amber eyes was fixed on him, and Troll reached for his sword, only to find the scabbard empty. The Jack had found him at last, and this time there would be no escape. Troll spun round, and again, as the huge wolves edged closer, the wind's howl filled his ears. He searched for a dagger, anything, but could find nothing. His hands were numb with cold, the blowing snow stinging his eyes. Closer now, on all sides. Troll's heart pounded. He was filled with terror, filled as a drowning man is filled by the inrush of deadly water, the shock of denial, the sudden loss of all strength, and with it all will. The wolves charged. Jaws closed on his limbs, fangs punching through skin. He was dragged down beneath the weight of onslaught. A wolf closed its mouth round the back of his neck. Dreadful grinding motions chewed through muscle. Bone snapped. His mouth gushed full and hot with blood and bile. He sagged, unable even to curl tight as the beast tore at his arms and legs, ripped into his belly. He could hear nothing but the wind's shriek, ever climbing. Troll opened his eyes. He was sprawled on his sleeping mat, pain throbbing in his muscles with the ghost memory of those savage teeth. Before we move on here, this might seem a little disconnected, but he's basically dreaming and having this nightmare, and I think a lot of it is a survivor's guilt sort of thing, where he feels terrible that he couldn't protect Ruled from the fate similar to what's described here in his nightmare, and so he's kind of, when something horrible happens to someone you love, no matter how strained the relationship, a lot of times we do that thinking of, if only I could have been the one in their position, if I could deal with the pain, I could deal with having died, but I just hate that it happened to them, that sort of thing. Troll Sengar is a fascinating character across the series, and it's weird that 5 videos in, 5 books in, this is the first scene where we're talking about him, but yeah, I just wanted to, I could have skipped over that little bit, but I thought it was important to include that he has this guilt about what's happened to Ruled. So, Troll opened his eyes. He was sprawled on his sleeping mat, pain throbbing in his muscles with the ghost memory of those savage teeth, and he heard screaming. Fear appeared in the entranceway, his eyes strangely red-rimmed, blinking in bewilderment. Troll, "It's coming from outside," he replied, climbing stiffly to his feet. They emerged to see figures running, converging on the house of the dead. "What is happening?" Troll shook his head at his brother's question. "Perhaps Udinaas—" They set off. Two slaves stumbled from the building's entrance, then fled in panic, one of them shouting incoherently. The brothers picked up their pace. Troll saw the Lethri Equator and her merchant on the bridge, figures rushing past them as they made a slow, hesitant approach. The screams had not abated. There was pain in those cries and horror. The sound, renewed breath after breath, made the blood gelid in Troll's veins. He could almost... Mayan was in the doorway, which was ajar. Behind her stood the slave Featherwitch. Neither moved. Fear and Troll reached them. Featherwitch's head snapped round, and the eyes half mad as they stared up at first Troll, then Fear. Fear came to the side of his betrothed in the doorway. He stared inward, face flinching with every scream. "Man," he said, "keep everyone else out, except for Tomad and Uruth and the Warlock King. When they arrive..." "Troll." The name was spoken like a plea. Mayan stepped back and Troll edged forward. Side by side, they entered the house of the dead. A mass, a hunched shape, covered in wax like peeling skin, revealing the glitter of gold coins, slouched down at the foot of the stone platform. Face lowered, forehead on knees, arms wrapped tight about shins, but still holding the sword, a mass, a hunched shape, voicing endless shrieks. The slave Udinaas stood nearby. He had been carrying a cauldron of wax. It lay on its side, 2 paces to the Lethri's left. The wax spilled out amidst twigs and straw. Okay, so, quick moment to comment. Udinaas is still tending to his task, even though the task has obviously changed drastically, because now instead of painstakingly laying coins and wax on roulette, he is doing the painstaking work of consoling the poor, recently tortured, resurrected guy. Udinaas' tenderness in this scene really caught me by surprise at first, but I think it's a really great depiction of how through tenderness and a bit of kind of right place, right time, and having to help a powerful person going through a traumatic experience, one can kind of start to gain a bit of power in their own right, at least in that relationship between the person helping the traumatized individual and that individual. And I don't think anyone would say Udinaas is exactly a power-hungry guy. If anything, he's pretty tired and resigned to his fate as a slave, but still, he's kind of stumbled into a little bit of a position of power. Okay, so we'll go on to kind of, you'll be able to see a little more of what I mean there. Udinaas was murmuring, soothing words cutting beneath the screams. He was moving closer to the shape, step by careful step. Fear made to start forward, but Troll gripped his upper arm and held him back. He'd heard something in those shrieks. They had come to answer the slave's low soothings, defiant at first, but now thinning, the voice filling with pleading, strangled again and again into shudders of raw despair, and through it all Udinaas continued to speak. "Sister, bless us, that is Roulette, my brother, who is dead." The slave slowly crouched before the horrid figure, and Troll could make out his words as he said, "There are coins before your eyes, Roulette Sengar. That is why you can see nothing. I would remove them. Your brothers are here. Fear and Troll, they are here." The shrieks broke then, replaced by helpless weeping. Troll stared as Udinaas then did something he did not think possible. The slave reached out and took Roulette's head in his hands, as a mother might an inconsolable child. Tender, yet firm, the hand slowly lifted it clear of his knees. A sobbing sound came from Fear, quickly silenced, but Troll felt his brother tremble. The face, oh, Father Shadow, the face. I'll pause again, just to quickly comment that shadows of, or this scene kind of gives us shadows of what's to come with Fear and Troll witnessing their brother Roulette in so much pain and sort of being struck dumb by the horror of the scene, not knowing what to do. There are echoes, or there's a repetition of that later on in the novel. A crazed mask of wax, cracked and scarred, and beneath it gold coins melded onto the flesh. Not one had dislodged, angled like the scales of armor around the stretched jaw, the gasping mouth. Udinaas leaned closer still, spoke low beside Roulette's left ear. Words answered with a shudder, a spasm that made coins click. The sound audible but muted beneath wax. A foot scraped across the stone flagstones surrounding the platform, drew in tighter. Fear jolted in Troll's grip, but he held on, held his brother back as Udinaas reached down to his belt and drew out a work knife. Whispering, rhythmic, almost musical, the slave brought the knife up, carefully set the edge near the tip alongside the coin covering Ruled's left eye. The face flinched, but Udinaas drew his right arm around into a kind of embrace, leaned closer, not pausing in his murmuring, pressure with the edge, minute motion. Then the coin flashed as it came loose along the bottom. A moment later it fell away. The eye was closed, a mangled red welt. Ruled must have sought to open it because Udinaas laid 2 fingers against the lid, and Troll saw him shake his head as he said something, then repeated it. A strange tick from Ruled's head, and Troll realized it had been a nod. Udinaas then reversed the position of his arms and set the knife edge to Ruled's right eye. Outside was the sound of a mass of people, but Troll did not turn about. He could not pull his gaze from the lethargy from his brother. He was dead, there was no doubt, none. The slave, who had worked on Ruled for a day and a night, filling mortal wounds with wax, burning coins into the cold flesh, who had then seen his charge return to life, now knelt before the eater, his voice holding insanity at bay, his voice and his hands guiding Ruled back to the living. That's such a succinct paragraph there to analyze or to kind of cover a lot of why I love Ruled. Just this emotional roller coaster he's been on in this one scene. It's so powerful, so interesting, and of course something you can only really do with the fantasy genre. I love it. Love Udinaas, love the scene. Guiding Ruled back to the living. A lethargy slave, Father Shadow, who are we to have done this? The coin was prized loose. Troll pulled Fear along as he stepped closer. He did not speak, not yet. Udinaas returned the knife to its sheath. He leaned back, one hand withdrawing to settle on Ruled's left shoulder. Then the slave pivoted and looked up at Troll. He's not ready to speak. The screaming has exhausted him, given the weight of the coins encasing his chest. Udinaas half rose, intending to move away, but Ruled's left arm rustled, hand sobbing away from the sword's grip. Coins clicking as the fingers groped, then found the slave's arm and held on. Udinaas almost smiled, and Troll saw for the first time the exhaustion of the man, the extremity of all that he had gone through, and settled down once more. Your brothers, Ruled, he said, Troll and Fear, they are here to take care of you now. I am but a slave. 2 coins fell away as Ruled's grip tightened. You will stay, Udinaas, Troll said. Our brother needs you. We need you. The lethargy nodded. As you wish, master, only I am tired. I keep blacking out, only to awaken at the sound of my own voice. He shook his head helplessly. I don't even know what I have said to your brother. It matters not, Fear cut in. What you have done. His words trailed away, and for a moment it seemed his face would crumble. Troll saw the muscles of his brother's neck tauten, then Fear's eyes closed tight. He drew a deep breath, and was himself once more. He shook his head, unable to speak. Troll crouched beside Udinaas and Ruled. Udinaas, I understand. You need rest, but stay for a few moments longer, if you can. The slave nodded. Troll shifted his gaze, studied Ruled's ravaged face, the eyes still shut, but there was movement behind them. Ruled, it is Troll. Listen to me, my brother. Keep your eyes closed for now. We must get this armor off you. At that, Ruled shook his head. They are funeral coins, Ruled. Yes, I know. Words raw and heavy, the breath pushed out from a constricted chest. Troll hesitated, then said, Udinaas has been with you, alone, preparing you. Yes, he is used up, brother. Yes, tell mother I want him. Of course, but let him go now, please. The hand dropped away from the slave's arm, clunking hard and seemingly insensate on the floor. The other hand, still holding the sword, suddenly twitched, and a ghastly smile emerged on Ruled's face. Yes, I hold it still. This is what he meant. Troll edged back slightly. Udinaas crawled off a short distance, leaned up against the chest of coins. He drew himself up into a shape echoing that of Ruled, and, in the moment before he turned his face away, Troll saw the visage fill with anguish. Exhaustion or no, for Udinaas, peace and rest was 10,000 paces away. Troll could see that, could understand that brutal truth. Roulette had had the slave, but whom did Udinaas have? Not a typical eater thought. But nothing was as it was. Troll rose and moved close to Fear. He thought for a moment, then swung round to the entranceway. Mayenne was still standing there, at her side the Lethery, Feather Witch. Troll gestured at the slave, then pointed to where Udinaas crouched. He saw her face stretch in horror, saw her shake her head. Then she ran from the building. Troll grimaced. A commotion at the entrance, and Mayenne withdrew from sight. Tomed and Aruth appeared, and behind them, as they slowly edged forward, came Hanan Mosag. Oh no. This sword. The damned sword. Alright, so there you have it. The resurrection of Roulette Sengar, one of my all-time favorite scenes from all of Malazan. And let's think now, what can we learn from the scene, or what can we learn from the way Erikson approached it? Well, I think first, we need to consider the symbolism, and it all comes back to this idea of being burdened by debts and owing things to society, while Udinaas was literally in financial debt, and that's why he's a slave. How much does he owe to the Sengar family? As their slave, you'd think he doesn't really owe them anything. He doesn't owe them any respect, any kindness, yet we see him giving that here. And then another question, does Udinaas have to be this kind of compassionate even more with Roulette, who was pretty brutish, or pretty rude to him before, or just rude to people in general before? And then how would any of us react to the situation if we were there, if we were a slave in Udinaas' shoes? Would we be as compassionate and tender with Roulette as he is? In so many cultures, death and burial rites are treated as a sort of passage from this world into a more peaceful one. But because Roulette held that damned sword, this idea of a peaceful passing over is totally mangled and destroyed. And now moving forward, how is a character sealed in wax and gold coins, how is he going to be able to interact with his family? Does his family owe him anything? Someone like Troll owe him something because Troll feels like he let his brother down and letting him die in the first place? And then does Roulette owe his family back? Does he have to apologize for how he was before, for being a little brash, for taking the sword, for totally changing things? A last thing, concluding question I want to consider and I want to leave everyone with, definitely not least of all these, Udinaas, through the sheer kindness of his character, has been able to calm Roulette a bit. And for anyone to be able to calm a person going through Roulette's ordeal, that's such a remarkable achievement, and it's not lost on the rest of the Sengars. No, this alliance, partnership formed between the youngest brother and the slave over a shared sort of trauma. This alliance is such a powerful thing. And Roulette and Udinaas will support each other, each owing much to the other, but in particular Roulette owing far more to Udinaas. And in the end, what a beautiful scene that honestly drastically changes the direction and tone of this book. I loved all of the build-up leading up to this, but I had no idea exactly what we were leading up to. And then I especially adore all the ways this Udinaas-Roulette relationship impacts the course of events throughout the rest of the novel. And so I think it was really important for Steven Erikson to go through painstaking detail, similar to how Udinaas went through painstaking amount of effort in preparing Roulette's body. Erikson's doing the same thing. Whereas Udinaas was preparing the body for what he thought was death in the afterlife, Erikson is basically preparing both the Roulette and Udinaas characters and their relationship. He's using this scene to set up the rest of the book. Not the afterlife, just Roulette's tortured life. Udinaas' tortured partnership with him. Beautiful stuff, brilliant stuff. And yeah, so that does it for this video. Thank you, as always, so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive and you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Please check out any of my other playlists, especially the ones with Malazan content, if there are specific other books or side series that you're maybe a little more curious to hear my thoughts on. And the next video in this beautiful scene series, I will be covering the tragic conclusion to the same book, Midnight Tides, and I will very much be hearkening back to things I've commented on and set up here in this analysis to try and point out a lot of wonderful connections between the two moments. So if you've watched this, I hope you're looking forward to that video too. Thanks again so much for watching, and have a good one. Bye.